Be'ezus Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Avodah Zarah Daf Nun Aleph. A little bit, the the printing is a little off, but today's daf Masechta Avodah Zarah Daf Nun Aleph. We will begin from Daf Nun Amud Beis, about a few lines from the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom. Nun Amud Beis. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Avodah Zarah she'ovden oiseh b'makel. Avodah Zarah that is normally served with a stick. In other words, let's say the way to serve this Avodah Zarah is by banging a stick. Okay, by banging a stick in front of the Avodah Zarah, you make a noise. That's the service of the Avodah Zarah. So instead of doing that, Shavu Makal b'Faneha, he took the stick and just broke it over his knee. Chayev, he's liable for serving an Avodah Zarah, even though that's not the normal way of serving this Avodah Zarah. Zarak makal b'fanel, but if he threw the stick towards the Avodah Zarah, Potter, he's exempt. So the Gemara says, Amalei Abai leRava. So Abai said to Rava, Maishno Shavar, why are you liable if you broke the stick in front of the Avodah Zarah? That's not the normal way of serving this Avodah Zarah. Answers the Gemara, and this is a very important point. Dehaviale ke'ein zvicha literally means that for every Avodah Zarah, you could be liable, even if it's not the normal way, if you do something that was normally done in the service of the Beis Hamikdash. So if you slaughter an animal to an Avodah Zarah, even though that's not the normal way of service for the Avodah Zarah, you will be held liable. So therefore, breaking the stick has the similar actions of slaughtering an animal, because when you slaughter an animal, you're breaking the neck. So you're slaughtering the stick, you're breaking something straight from the stick, and therefore that is like similar to slaughtering an animal. And therefore, if you broke the stick in front of the idol, you were held liable. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, Zorak Nami Havali Kain Zrika, if you threw the stick at the idol, you should be held liable, because that's similar to sprinkling of the blood, that they used to sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach, and that was done in the Beis Hamikdash. So why are you not liable if you threw the stick at the idol? Amalei. So Rava answered Abaya, "Be'ina zrika mishtaberes v'leika." We need a zrika that breaks apart. When you sprinkle blood, it just breaks apart into drops. But when you throw a stick, it still remains whole. So that's not similar to the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore you're not held liable. So Esvei, so they asked the question, Sofas lotsoya, if you fed manure, let's say this was not the way to serve the idol. Maybe the idol was served in another way with manure and urine. So if you fed the idol manure, or you poured urine onto the idol, which was not the way it's normally served. It's normally served with manure and urine, but not in that manner. So now we go to Amid Aleph. No, Aleph, no, Chayv. You're held liable. So the Gemara understands like this, that the reason why you're held liable is because you're doing something the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara understands Bishlam Avid Shel Meimei Reglayim, by pouring the urine onto the idol, Ikazrika Mishtaberes. That's similar to pouring blood on the Mizbeach. So even though you're serving the idol in an unnormal fashion, then it's considered to be a service to the idol. Similar to the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash. Elatzaya, by throwing manure, manure is like throwing a stick at the idol. My zrika mishtaberes ika. What kind of how does it break apart when you throw manure at the idol? And says the Gemara, it was like a liquid type of manure, and that's why it's similar to spraying blood on the Mizbeach, and that's what that Bryce is talking about. I want to point out that it's not like if there was no way, take the idol that you serve with the stick. Rashi points out that if you didn't serve the idol at all with a stick, as I mentioned, the reason why you're liable is because the typical way to serve the idol is with a stick, by banging the stick. So therefore, if you do it in a manner that it was done in the Beis Hamikdash, so then you're liable. That's why if you break the stick, you're held liable. But if this was a idol that you served not with the stick, with a ball, so then breaking the stick in front of the idol has nothing to do with this idol, and therefore you're not going to be held liable. Anyway, so the Gemara says, you said to me, breaking a stick is liable. So let's say you have an idol that you serve it with a grasshoppers. Okay, normally you give it a grasshopper. The Brisa says, let us say it's machlekes to manoim. Shochat lo kachagav. If you slaughtered a grasshopper to this idol, so that's Rabbi Huda chayev. Rabbi Huda says you're liable. Mechamen says you're potter. So therefore, Rabbi Huda is aligned with Rav, who said that if you break the stick, you're held liable. So my lab hakami. They're actually arguing that way. Since it's similar to slaughtering. That's why Rabbi Huda says you're liable. That's not considered like slaughtering. The only way you'll be held liable if you actually slaughter an animal. That's why Chacham says you're potter. But if you just slaughter a grasshopper, then you would not be held liable. So there you have it. It's a machlekes. So according to Chachamim, if you would actually break the stick to that idol that you serve with the stick, you will not be held liable. So the Gemara says, "Loy, not so." The Kuli Alma, everybody holds. Loy Amin and Kain Zvicha. Everybody holds. You don't need that you slaughter an animal. Slaughter a stick. In other words, here the Gemara is going throwing it back. That nobody holds that if you break a stick, you'll be held liable because that's not slaughtering. That's just breaking a stick. You need to be slaughtering a live creature. That's what you need, which is similar to the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash. And the reason why you hold, Rabbi Huda holds Yechayev, because a grasshopper is different. Its neck is similar to a neck of behema. So that's almost like slaughtering a behema. That's why Rabbi Huda says you're liable. And the Chacham says it's still not an animal, so therefore you're not held liable. But if everybody would agree that if you broke a stick, you would not be held liable. So the Gemara just reverses it on its tail. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avuha, Amar Rav. Rav said another thing. Avodah Zarah Rav said if you serve a stick, Avodah Zarah normally with a stick. Let's say to serve this idol, you make noise with a stick. Shava makel b'fanel. If you break the stick in front of it, chayev, you're held liable. V'naseres, and the stick becomes aser. Zark makel b'fanel. But if you threw the stick in front of it, chayev, and it wouldn't be aser. So I'm going to tell you that if you throw a stick in front of it, you are liable, because we're talking about a situation that not only do you serve the stick by making the idol by making noise to the idol, but actually if you throw the stick to the idol, that's a way to serve the idol. Okay, so people do throw the stick to the idol, so that's the normal way to serve this idol. So then you're held liable because you're serving the idol in the normal fashion that this idol is served. But the stick does not become aser. The item that you use does not become aser. Amalei Rav Rav Nachman. So Rav said to Rav Nachman, "Ma'ishna shava." Why, if you break the stick, you're liable, and the stick becomes prohibited? You're not allowed to benefit from the stick. Because it's like you're slaughtering an animal to the idol. Zark nami havalakain zrika, but isn't that similar to spraying blood on the mizbeach? So if you throw the stick to the idol, you should be holding that the stick itself becomes aser. Al Malay, so Rav Nachman answered Rava, but Eden Zrika Mishtaberes V'leika, you need a stick that breaks apart. In other words, spraying blood on the mizbeach it breaks apart into droplets. Here, when you throw the stick, it remains whole, so it's not the same. So again, we're discussing over here not the act so much of the liability, but also is the item itself become aser. So the Gemara held that Rav said that if you throw something at an idol, the item itself will remain permitted, even though if the act of throwing is the way to serve this idol, so then despite that, the stick itself will remain mutter. Elam yatif. After all this introduction, avnei beis markulis b'ma yasra. If you throw sticks to the markulis, remember the Mercury Avodah Zarah was a setup stones in a formation, and people will throw stones at that formation. Um, and every stone is usher. So why is it usher? Throwing a stone is not like throwing blood. It doesn't break apart. So why does the stone remain usher? So here the Gemara is going to say that the stone regarding the markulis, when you throw it, it becomes the Avodah Zarah. If it becomes the Avodah Zarah, so it remains usher. It remains usher. And technically that could be nullified. However, when you throw it to the Avodah Zarah, it also becomes a service to Avodah Zarah. It's actually becomes like it serves the Avodah Zarah. Let's say there's 10 stones in the Markulis, and you throw an 11th stone. That 11th stone, in addition to becoming the Avodah Zarah, will now become the service of the Avodah Zarah, called Takroivis Avodah Zarah. And therefore, once it's served, it becomes like the item itself that was sacrificed to the Avodah Zarah, that always remain aser. So that's what he says. Amalei. So he asked back, after the kashali, I also had this question. Shaltila Rabba Baravu, Rabba Bavu Lechia Bar Rav. And Lechia Bar Rav asked the same question to Rav. V'amalei, and Rav said, Nase Kimagadol Avodah Zarah. The reason why the Avnei Beis Makulas, why does it become aser, is because the idol itself is now growing bigger. So there's another question. How could it become part of the Avodah Zarah? No one served that stone. In other words, there's an opinion that holds that an Avodah Zarah of a guy, as soon as he makes the Avodah Zarah, it becomes Asa. Fine. But if you hold that an Avodah Zarah doesn't become Asa until it's served, when the guy threw the stone, and nobody served that stone, then how did that stone become usher as an avodah zarah? Amalei, so Rav answered, Kol achas v'achas nasas avodah zarah, v'tikroivus of a chavartar. Each one becomes a service to the previous stones. So therefore, since it became a service, a sacrifice to the previous stones, therefore it becomes usher. You see, when you throw a stick at an idol, it's not a sacrifice to the idol. It's serving the idol, but the stick is not the sacrifice. Here, it's a sacrifice. I'm sacrificing, the guy is sacrificing a stone to give it to the idol. So that becomes takroivis of, and therefore, it becomes a sacrifice to the Avodah Zarah. If that's the case, Basraisa, the last stone, Mia Tishtari, should become Aser. Why? Because it became part of the Avodah Zarah, but nobody served it, the Avodah Zarah. You see, you just answered that each stone is serving the previous stones. So therefore, every stone was worshipped. But the last stone became the Avodah Zarah, but nobody worshipped that Avodah Zarah. And therefore, according to the opinion that it doesn't become Asr until it's worshipped, that last stone should be permitted. So Amalei, Rav says, Yudat la zil shkala. If you know which was the last stone, you could actually take it. Rav Ashi says, Kol achas v'achas nachas t'kroivis la'atzma v't'kroivis l'chavarta. Each stone, even the last stone, is serving the previous stones. The 11th stone is serving the 10 stones that were there before it, but it's also serving itself. So the 11th stone is not only serving the previous 10, but actually the 11th stone is serving the 11th stone. So the 11th stone becomes like an idol that was serviced, and therefore it becomes aser. So again, more than that, what Rav is answering is that these stones are becoming the Avodah Zarah. Unlike when you throw a stick at an Avodah Zarah, the stick does not become the Avodah Zarah. Here, when you're throwing a stone at the Markulis, it becomes the Avodah Zarah, and it becomes the Avodah Zarah, and therefore it's also. That's the main reason. And if in order to become Avodah Zarah, you have to serve it, so it's also like servicing the previous stones. So the Gemara asks the question. Now we learned in the Mishnah. Matzah b'roish if you found on top of the markulis, let's say the markulis is a pile of stones, and you found ksus, moyes, or kalim, you find somebody left his wallet there, or money there, or a guy left a coffee cup there. Harei l'miturim, you're permitted to take it. Parkile anavim v'atar shel shibolim v'yenu shmanu slosses v'chol davar sheyotze beikarav legam mizbeach aser. If you find something that was normally used to be serviced in the Beis Hamikdash on top of the markulas, then you shouldn't take it because it's aser. That was used as a sacrifice to this markulas. Okay, but if you find somebody's coffee mug on top of the makula stone, you can take it. But if you find oil, wine, or flour there, then it's aser. So the Gemara says like this: Bishlama if you find wine, oil, or flour there, I can understand why wine, flour, oil, because it looks like it was sprinkled onto that makulas, and that's very similar to the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, fine, that's aser. Ella, if you find parkile anava atar shel shibam, if you find a crown made of wheat stalks, or if you find a cluster of grapes with its branch, that was not, they didn't use that in the Beis Hamikdash, and that doesn't break apart. That's one piece. So somebody, put it or threw it onto the mizbeach, onto this markulis. So why did this become asa? Why is parkile anovim asa? That's the question. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rava Amar Ula Kegoin Shabatzra B'tchila Lekach. Since we can assume that one harvested these wheat or harvested these grapes for the Avodah Zarah, and therefore, as soon as they harvest it, they made that grapes and that wheat into an Avodah Zarah. So that's similar to the way it was done, that you broke a stick in front of it, and therefore it's similar to slaughtering, and therefore it itself becomes asar. We're going to learn more about this Mishnah on Amud Beis. So the Gemara discusses over here a new topic. Amar Rababo Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Manayim, how do I know? Somebody, a Jew, slaughters a blemished animal to an avodah zarah, he's not held liable. Shnema, because the pasuk says, only slaughter animals to the Eibishter, not to avodah zarah. Lelehim means if you slaughter to a foreign god, yachram you did an avera, you should be only slaughtering to God. The Torah asked slaughtering to an avodah zarah only if such an animal would be kosher to slaughter to God. But if it's not kosher to slaughter to God, then you're not held liable. So therefore, if you slaughter an animal that is blemished, you are not held liable. Says the Gemara, Rava had just a question on this. But what way was this animal blemished? If it had a cataract. So true, a Jew should not slaughter an animal that has a cataract to the Beis Hamikdash. That's considered a balmum. But B'nai Noach, if he would slaughter that animal to God, to Hashem, even on a bama, on his own private altar, he didn't do an avera. So therefore, if you slaughter it to an avodah zarah, that should be a kosher, so to speak, a liable type of slaughtering. For B'nai Noach, on his own private altar, if he slaughters to the Eibishter, that's fine. If it has just a cataract, it's still considered a kosher animal. He didn't do anything wrong. So l'avodah zarah mabaya, certainly he can slaughter this cataract to an avodah zarah. So if it's kosher for the avodah zarah to slaughter, so therefore, if a Jew would slaughter a animal that has a cataract in its eye, he should be held liable. Ella, what we're talking about over here, where a Jew is not held liable if he slaughters a blemished animal, the mechusar eivar, that the animal is missing, let's say, an entire limb. It's missing a foot. If you slaughter such an animal to an avodah zarah, you're not held liable. Like Rabbi Lazar explained. Rabbi Lazar explained, how do I know a goy who wants to slaughter a b'nai noach, who wants to slaughter a animal that's missing a limb to God? How do you know he's doing an avera? Shnemar, because it says by noach, mikol achai, mikol basar, shnai, mikol. Amra Taira, because it says God told Noach, since I'm going to ask you after the Mabul to bring sacrifices, I want you to bring animals that mikol achai, that could live, that every limb is alive. Yeah, you cannot bring something that is a mechusar aver. You cannot bring an animal that's missing a limb. So we see that a mechusar aver is usher for bnei noach. So you learn it from where umikol ha chai. Says the Gemara, Makai mikol chai b'boyelei lemutei treifa. I need mikol chai to teach you that even a whole animal, if it has an internal injury, and it's going to die within the year, so that's what I need mikol chai, that he could not bring any animal that has an internal injury. And says the Gemara, a treifa, you learn it from another pasuk. L'chaya zera nafka, you learn it from l'chaya zera, that you need animals that can have offspring. A treifa cannot have an offspring. So now mikol chai is free. Says the Gemara, that's why I could learn from the Chaya Zera to exclude a treifa. According to the opinion that says a treifa could give off offspring, how could you limit a treifa? The Noach could not bring a treifa from the Chaya Zera. A treifa could have offspring. So Amakra, because I have another pasuk that Noach could not bring a treifa animal. Again, a treifa animal has an internal injury. How do I know Noach could not bring a treifa animal into the teva? Itach. God told Noach to bring the animals to be with you. Itcha b'daimelecha. It has to be similar to you. And just like Noach was not a treifa, Noach was healthy. So also the animals that you bring into the teva should be healthy. Says the Gemara, V'dilma Noach gufi treifa hava. Maybe Noach himself was unhealthy. Maybe Noach had an internal injury. Answers the Gemara, Tamim ksivbeit. Tamim, the Torah calls Noach healthy. He was complete. So the Gemara says, how do you know that means he was healthy? Dilman Tamim b'drachav. Maybe Noach, it means he was complete in his midos. So tzaddik ksivbeit. That already says it's tzaddik. Says the Gemara, Dilman Tamim b'drachav, it's tzaddik b'masav. Maybe it means that Noach was healthy in his midos. He was good in his midos, and he didn't rip anybody off. So he was a tzaddik. But internally, Noach was a treifa. Now, even though we know a treifa can't live for an entire year, the Mabul was for an entire year, you have to remember, time was suspended during the Mabul. So Noach was able to survive. Obviously, he was not a treifa. So how do you know Noach was not a treifa? Answers the Gemara, it's impossible to say Noach was a treifa. The Noach was a treifa. So what is Hashem telling him? I want you to only bring treifa animals into the teva, but not healthy animals. So now it must be that Noach was not a treifa. That's a svara. And therefore, treifa, how do you know Noach was not allowed to bring a treifa animal into the teva? Is because the animals have to be as healthy as Noach. So now that frees up Mikol Achai to teach you that only animals that have all their limbs intact. So then the Gemara says, Hashda nafim itach, that a treifa, Noach could not bring a treifa into the teva. The Chaya Zera lamali. What did the Chaya Zera teach you? That an animal has to have offsprings, be able to have offspring. So the Gemara says, Imi itach, if I would just learn itach, havamil tzafsa ba'alma, to keep Noach company. Healthy animals keep Noach company. Animals with their complete limbs. Even if it's an old animal or a castrated animal that cannot have offspring. The purpose of bringing all these animals into the teva was that when they leave the teva, they'll be able to populate the world by having offspring. Amar Ablaza, new topic. How do I know if you slaughter an animal to the markulis, you're liable? Now, makulis, the way to serve that idol, that is throw a stone at it. And here, you're slaughtering an animal. So that you know. The Torah tells you, don't slaughter animals to seirim, the seirim goats. But what that means is Avodah Zarah, in the shape of goats. If that was not the way to serve that idol, the ksiv, even if it's not the normal way to serve that idol, you're not allowed to shecht an animal to that idol, as we've been saying throughout the day. Here, because slaughtering was done in the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, any type of service that's similar to the Beis Hamikdash, even if it's not the normal way to serve this idol, is usher to do for an idol. So you learn it from the pasuk La Yizbechu Eidos Ovchem Lasi'irim. Says the Gemara. I'm going to go through this very quickly, but what the Gemara is going to say over here, that I need La Yizbechu Eidos Ovchem Lasi'irim to teach you another teaching, and that teaching is that you're not allowed to slaughter an animal. You're not allowed to slaughter an animal on a private altar when the Beis Hamikdash was around, let's say, or when the Mishkan was around. Now, there was a time that the people were allowed to make private altars, a bama. But let's say someone made hegdish an animal when you were permitted, the private altars were permitted. And then all of a sudden they built the Mishkan, or they built the Beis Hamikdash, and now that private altar is usher. So you were makadesh the animal when you were permitted to bring that animal on your private altar. But then the Beis Hamikdash was built, so the Torah now gave you an isser not to slaughter that animal on your private bama. And that's what this pasuk is teaching you. And you have to look at the context over there. So how could it teach you that if you slaughter an animal to an Avodah Zarah, you'll be held liable? And the Gemara is going to say that Yizbechu Oid can teach you two liabilities, two different things. V'loy Yizbechu and v'loy Oid. It's as if it says v'loy twice in the pasuk, and therefore one teaches you can't bring the animal on your private altar, even though you makadesh it. But by the time it was mutter to bring animals on your private altar, once the Mishkan is built, you're not allowed to do that. And it also teaches you that even though it's not the normal way to serve the idol, you're not allowed to slaughter an animal to an idol. So that's what Gemara is going to say, and we're going to run through it. Do I need to teach you this? I needed to teach you something else. We go in the pasuk. I know you're not allowed to, if there's an Isser Bama, and you're makar of something shas Isser Abamas. Let's say when the Beis Hamikdash was around, if you slaughter in your private bama, you actually get karas. But how do I know you get? There's a lav for it. Talmud loy pen talo sechak darblavin amrav ilad amrav amrav kamakom shnem mishama pen al eina ela b'loisase. So pen teaches you that when you makdish the kava elach. So if you makdish something b'shas Isser Abamas and you makrav it on your private altar, you get a lav plus karas. The rest of the pasuk teaches you what happens when you makdish it, when you could have been makrav it on your private bama, and then all of a sudden the Beis Hamikdash was built. This teaches you the Torah teaches you that if you were makdish the animal at a permissible time to bring it on your private altar, and then the Mishkan was built, you're not allowed to bring it on your private altar anymore. If you bring it on your private altar, you would not get karas, you just get a lav. But that's what don't slaughter your animals privately anymore. So how could this pasuk teach you that you're not allowed to slaughter an animal to an Avodah Zarah, even if it's not dar chubakach? Rava said, you read it's as if the veloy is written twice, and it can teach you two teachings. And one of the teachings that this pasuk teaches you is you're never allowed to slaughter an animal to an avodah zarah, even if it's not the normal way. New Mishnah. If you found on top of the markulis money, a ksus, let's say a item of clothing, or a kalim, or any type of coffee mug, harei l'materm, you can take it. Now, the Gemara is going to discuss over here, maybe it was placed there to beautify the Avodah Zarah. And if something is placed to beautify the Avodah Zarah, not as a service. So we have some things that are offerings to the Avodah Zarah. You bring a piece of cake to the Avodah Zarah. You have the Avodah Zarah itself. Okay, you have a sacrifice to Avodah Zarah. You slaughter an animal to Avodah Zarah. That's all what we've been discussing. Now we're going to discuss something. Somebody puts like a necklace around the Avodah Zarah. Well, so maybe you beautify the Avodah Zarah. That becomes aser. So parkile anavim v'atar shel shibarim v'yenish shmonim shlosos v'kol davar sheyoysim b'karav magal mizbeach aser. If you find these type of items, which we said is cluster of grapes or a crown made of wheat stalks, or wine, oil, or flour, and anything that's brought on the Mizbeach, all these things that you find in Markulis, you don't know who put it there, Aser, those things are prohibited. You're not allowed to take it. But if you find on top of the stones a little, like a couple of bucks, or somebody's shirt, you're allowed to take it. Says the Gemara, how do you know? How do you know that noi avodah zarah? In other words, the beauty of the avodah zarah. Someone beautifies the avodah zarah, it becomes asa. So the Torah tells you if you see stones and wood that's next to the avodah zarah, don't take it. The pasuk says, if you see silver and gold on top of the avodah zarah, don't take it. So how do you resolve these two psukim? In other words, what the Torah is telling you is don't take the beautiful parts of the avodah zarah. If someone did something nice for the avodah zarah, so then the Torah is telling you don't take it. Now, how does the Torah tell you in one pasuk that if they made nice with the avodah zarah with stone and wood, don't take it, and then the Torah leaves that out in another pasuk? The Torah tells you don't take their silver and gold that's on top of the avodah zarah. The wood and the stone has to be something that's nice to gold and silver. It's a beautiful thing. What that teaches you is that if you find just a rock on the avodah zarah or a piece of a wood chip, so that doesn't beautify the avodah zarah. If you find a rock carved, chiseled formation on top of the avodah zarah, or a stone with a carving, a wood with a carving on it, so that it's davar shanoi. It's something that beautifies the avodah zarah. That's also to take. Similar to any gold and silver that you put on an avodah zarah, that's automatically going to beautify the avodah zarah. That's also. So the stone and the wood has to be something that would beautify the avodah zarah. Only then it's asar. And if it doesn't beautify the avodah zarah, then it's permitted. Says the Gemara, how do you know? Let's do it the reverse. That the Torah is telling you, just like silver and gold, just putting it on the avodah zarah becomes asr. So also stone and wood, wood and stone, if you put it onto the avodah zarah, it automatically becomes asr. Because, so the Gemara says, in Kain lo yom aleim. Why does the Torah says leisachman kesef zav aleim? Don't leave out that pasuk. They already told you don't take silver and gold, right? In the previous pasuk. So fine. So now the Gemara is going to ask on our Mishnah. If the Mishnah said that if you find money on top of let's say silver coins on top of a idol, you're permitted to take it. Wait, mayas dar shanayhu. Money can be something that beautifies the avodah zarah. Rabbi Yani explained, "Bikis kasha v'utolo le'betzavari." He's talking about it's not the money that you're finding onto the avodah zarah of Markulis. You're finding a wallet full of money, and it's somebody put it by its neck. So probably it was left there for safekeeping. So therefore, it's not to beautify the avodah zarah. So if you find it there, you can take it. Ksus, if someone puts a shirt on top of the avodah zarah, that could beautify the avodah zarah. So why are you allowed to take it? Somebody folded the shirt, put it on top of the avodah zarah, and it seems to be that he put it there for safekeeping, that he's coming back to take it. So therefore, if you find it there, you can keep it. Says the Gemara, Kili Davashanahi. If someone puts like a nice coffee mug on top of the Markulis, that beautifies the avodah zarah. It's not just like a plain piece of stone. It's a plain piece of wood. It's a nice coffee mug. So why are you allowed to take it? Papa explained the schifele mashkilta aresha. It's like the coffee mug probably had coffee in it, and it's overturned, and the person left it there. So it was done. It was placed there in a manner that doesn't show that it's beautifying the markulas, and therefore you're allowed to take it. Rav Asi Barchia says, "Kol shilifnim min hakilkolin afilamayim melech asa." Let's say in Avodah Zarah, let's say a statue. They would put a curtain in front of that statue. So anything that's in front of the curtain, facing the Avodah Zarah, even if you find water and salt, which doesn't beautify the Avodah Zarah, is aser, because probably it was sacrificed to the Avodah Zarah, so you can't take it. Chutz l'kol kalim, but if you find something behind the curtain, davar shanoi aser. If it beautifies the Avodah Zarah, it's aser. Sheina shanoi mutter. But if it's not beautifying the Avodah Zarah, it's permitted. So if you find something, let's say a flower of roses behind the curtain, so therefore not in front of the Avodah Zarah, but outside the curtain of the Avodah Zarah, you can't take it because probably somebody put the flowers there to beautify the Avodah Zarah. But if you find water and salt in front of the curtain, so then it's permitted because water and salt, putting it in front of Avodah Zarah doesn't beautify, a Poland Spring water bottle doesn't beautify the Avodah Zarah, so you're permitted to take it. Rabbi Yossi Bachanina, Naktinin, Enkakon le Paparvale Makulis. Avodah Zarah Pa'ar Makulis do not have curtains. We don't consider curtain halachas there. Lamai, what is that teaching you? That means, are we teaching you that putting water and salt in front of the pa'ar and makulas is permitted because these curtains don't mean anything? Wait a second. What do they do to the pa'ar makulas? How do they serve it? They defecate in front of the pa'ar. They which is this week's parsha of Eschanan, and they defecate in front of the pa'ar. Or what they do is they throw stones at it. So certainly, if they just bring water and salt to it, that would beautify that avodah zarah. So therefore, why is water and salt permitted? Ella dami Even so, what we're trying to say is that even if you normally would find water and salt outside the curtain by any other avodah zarah, it's permitted because water and salt do not beautify this avodah zarah. But if someone brings water and salt to the markulis, no matter where it's located, as long as it's close enough to the markulis, it's aser because they do disgusting things to the markulis and the pa'ar. They throw stones at it. They defecate in front of it. So the nice part that they're doing to that avodah zarah is bringing water and salt. So water and salt in front of the pa'ar or markulis was considered to be aser. Let's just do the Mishnah and then we'll stop. Avodah zarah. So a avodah zarah that had attached to it a garden or a bathhouse, and a Jew wants to use that bathhouse or garden, it's open to the public, then you're allowed to enjoy that bathhouse, but you're not allowed to pay for it, because if you're going to pay the priest, it says donation. You're not allowed to give a donation because that money is used for the avodah zarah. But you're not allowed to, pay for it. You're not allowed to make a donation to use it. Generally, they had these gardens. They say it's free, and the merchatz is free, but they request a donation. So the Mishnah teaches you that a Yid is allowed to use that merchatz and gina, but he should not make a donation. If it belongs as a partnership to somebody else, I guess what the Mishnah is going to say is, then you could make a donation, but make sure that the donation goes to the other people who have nothing to do with the avodah zarah. Now, avodah zarah shenochri asur miyad. The Mishnah teaches you an important concept. When a goy makes an avodah zarah, even if he did not yet service that avodah zarah, which we discussed today, is right away asur. Shall Yisrael, but a Jew, ein asura, is not asur achati aved, because a Jew is not asur, even if he was really making the avodah zarah until he actually services the avodah zarah. It's not asur, that avodah zarah. A Jew will regret up until the last moment not to do the bad thing, and therefore it's not considered an avodah zarah until actually the Jew actually serves it. But if he did not serve it yet, it's not going to be asur. Okay, so we just ended Bez Hashem Daf Nun in Avodah Zarah.